I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Anders Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anta
and Aaron.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And we're talking about Kenneth Branagh's latest Hercule Poirot mystery, A Haunting in Venice.
And here we go.
One of the most enduring genres remains the murder mystery whodunit, though Hollywood hasn't always served it well. Novels and television remain the home for murder mysteries for the most part. But in recent years, we've seen the prestige murder mystery film make something of a comeback, with Rian Johnson's Knives Out and Glass Onion, and in the more traditional vein, Kenneth Branagh's adaptations of Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot stories. Branagh, both directing and starring as the master detective, began the series with Murder on the Orient Express in 2017, following up with Death on the Nile in 2022. Both of Christie's novels had been previously adapted to the screen, most famously Sidney Lumet's 1974 version of Orient Express. However, for the third entry in the series, A Haunting in Venice, Branagh tackles Christie's Poirot novel Halloween Party, retitling it and transposing the setting from England to the titular city of Venice. Like the two previous Branagh adaptations, A Haunting in Venice has a large ensemble cast with recognizable stars and features the brilliant Poirot attempting to solve a murder mystery that becomes more complex and devious as the film goes on. Twists and turns lie at every corner, and no one remains above suspicion. This is the primary appeal of these films for most audiences. However, A Haunting in Venice offers a couple of novel twists to the series. As was clear from the marketing of the film, for instance, on first seeing the trailer, I did not immediately register it as another Poirot film. It plays up the haunting and the horror angle of the title. Secondly, it moves from the setting of the first two films on a train or a cruise ship to a haunted orphanage in Venice. The plot of the film involves the famous detective, now in the post-war period, having lost his faith and giving up solving mysteries. He's recruited by his friend, the novelist Ariadne Oliver, played by Tina Fey. Oliver is a recurring character from the books, whom Christie herself acknowledges to be an analogue of herself. Poirot's goal here? To determine the truth behind a famous medium, Michelle Yeoh's Joyce Reynolds, who claims to be able to make authentic contact with the dead. All the characters are invited to attend a Halloween party and a seance in a haunted orphanage, hosted by a distraught opera singer, Rowena Drake, played by Kelly Riley, whose daughter was supposedly driven insane by the ghosts of the orphanage's children and killed herself 1 year ago. Of course, there are plenty of surprises and subsequent murders and betrayals. A Haunting in Venice takes advantage of its atmospheric setting in the orphanage, especially once a storm hits the city and the guests are unable to leave by boat. We get creepy passages, lightning and thunder, and jump scares aplenty. Poirot himself finds his own sanity pressed by the setting and his past traumatic experiences. Now, I never saw all of the first two Branagh Poirot films, just the first half of Murder on the Orient Express. And while I mostly enjoyed what I saw there, A Haunting in Venice seems much more anchored in physical sets, shooting in the city of Venice versus the backlots and CGI establishing shots found in the first film or in the clips of the second that I've seen. It makes a big difference in a film that's all about the difference between authenticity and illusion and the ability to discern the difference. I think the film may benefit this fall from being horror adjacent with a story of ghosts and hauntings, while still pleasing those who want a murder mystery story that offers up a satisfying ending and resolution.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Hercule Poirot, I've found something. I've looked at it from every which way. I am the smartest person I ever met, and I can't figure it out, so I came to the second.
You are up to something, my friend.
I've seen a million of these so-called psychics, each one a fake.
I do not believe in psychics.
Come with me to a seance. Spot the con, I can't.
Detective, you are here to discredit me, but I can talk to the dead.
I'd give all I have to hear my daughter's voice.
If someone wants to be heard, we are here. Listening.
So what did you guys think? How does A Haunting in Venice stack up to Branagh's first two Poirot mysteries? Is it too scary to work as a murder mystery in the standard genre mode? Or is this a good way to freshen up the series? Anton, I know you enjoyed the first two films, so what's your take?
Well, I'd actually say I didn't love the second one. I'm kind of lukewarm on it. And I think A Haunting in Venice is probably my favorite of the three. And I think that combination of gothic ghost story and classic whodunit is really compelling, and it works really well. It's well executed, and the atmosphere is great. And in part because of the location shooting, which was a course correction after one of the worst features of Death on the Nile, I thought was the really bad CGI for a lot of the Egyptian setting.
Yeah,
so
I've seen the shots of that.
yeah. And so for me, like, these whodunits, like, this is not trying to reinvent the genre. Of course not. It's following a classic Christie novel, with some variation, as you noted. But it has its own pleasures, and it's someone playing within the rules of the game, and I think they're playing well. And so I liked it a lot.
How about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I like the fact that it does do a different approach from the others, not only in terms of setting, not only in terms of the filmmaking style, but also just the blending of genres, right? The first two are very much just solely existing in that whodunit genre, and this one is trying something different, not only with the approach to like Poirot as a character, but then also just the way that it resolves the mystery, because it leaves some questions hanging in terms of the satisfaction or not of like his answers for it, right?
Yeah.
There's elements that are kind of left hanging. I don't know if it's my favorite of the three. I'm kind of weird where I find Death on the Nile extremely enjoyable, and it's on like a pure mystery level. I actually think it's the most compelling and the one that kept me guessing more than the others. That be that as may, it's also the corniest of the films, and it's the broadest. And I actually think that works with the performers that he's assembled, like Gal Gadot and Russell Brand and Armie Hammer and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just, then there has weird choices like the flashback sequences and the CGI sets where it's like, if those elements weren't in the movie, I'd probably think it's like a very good whodunit. But there's a kind of weird, corny, cheap 90s-ishness to it.
Yeah.
But without the sort of the filmmaking style of the 90s. I know what you're saying, though.
Yeah, no, exactly. But A Haunting in Venice is like a fun mystery horror hybrid that has a lot of the same appeals as the other ones and of like a traditional whodunit, but I think the added genre and stylistic angle makes it like slightly more interesting as a film.
Yeah, I was surprised by how much I liked this film. Like, I don't think it's again, as you say, not reinventing the wheel, but there's something satisfying about that, and yet it offers enough variation and twists on the genre to make it I think a solid recommend. And I really actually liked the filmmaking in it. Like, it's actually very classical in a lot of ways, even though Branagh still loves his canted angles.
Oh yeah, the canted angles are so amazing. Yeah, and he picked not only just canted angles, he picked some very unusual angles for different shots. It reminds me a lot of The King's Speech, the director.
Tom Hooper.
Oh, Tom Hooper.
Tom Hooper, who also will often choose a very unusual angle for a shot where you'll have, a character to the side of a frame and a whole bunch of negative space, or like a shot, it's like very high above in front of the door in this one of the palazzo. And it's like the characters are down at the bottom, and he's using, almost like, I don't know if he's using like kind of the fish bulb lens at times.
He is.
To get that
he's using wide lenses to warp people's faces at points. It actually veers into almost Terry Gilliam territory.
You get close-ups with that. But I think that's what I like. It is very stylistic. It is very intentionally. It's not like when I say it's classical filmmaking, I don't mean that it's like sort of like classically framed and stuff like that. It's very stylistic, but what I mean is that it's not relying on CGI. It's not, for the most part, it's not relying on big flashy scenes or camera movements and stuff like that, but it is doing interesting things, and it's trying to, I think it really works because this one, more from what I know of the stories of the first two and even Christie's novels, is really leaning into the psychological aspect because the characters are dealing with their post-war traumas and things, and so you are trying to. It's a very expressionistic in that way, because the scenery, the setting, the camera lenses, the strange angles, the strange lenses are actually meant to express the inner psychological disruptions of the character. So that's actually very classical if you think of expressionism as a classical mode of filmmaking.
I always felt that his Murder on the Orient Express was good, but just very straightforward.
Which is a lot of the appeal of the film, right?
Yeah, like, it is what it is, and it, a good adaptation of one of the most famous whodunits. The second one, I think you're right, Aaron. There is that sort of, it's a little bit like lighter, and partly because of like the sunny, like sort of Egyptian
like
desert
The Mummy?
setting. Yeah, but like it just has a little bit of a different feel. I don't love that as much. This one leans into that atmosphere, but I also think we could probably overstate the genre blending, because I think I don't know if it's horror. Like it's a ghost story, and a lot of ghost stories are mysteries, and so it's leaning into that aspect of a lot of ghost stories. The mystery is like
is there a ghost?
Killed? Yeah, well, is there a ghost? And then if there is, or who caused that original death? Who was the murderer of that original person? That's what a lot of ghost stories are about. But here, you're right. It does, we get a few jump scares. We get some of the other conventions of horror. And it's the sort of thing where like those elements aren't like, they're not so much that they get in the way of like this still being an Agatha Christie whodunit, but they do kind of just like make things more richer and atmospheric. And it's, the movie's never like super scary, but you're a little bit like on edge a little bit more about like who might be doing what.
So to be clear for listeners, do you guys agree that like, while it is a little bit scary, it's not too scary to like recommend to most people unless they're particularly scaredy cats? Yeah.
Totally.
There was this person sitting next to me at the movie. I think like a Gen Z couple, and at the end of the film, he was like, turned to his the person he was with, and he was like, "Well, I don't really like horror movies. I don't like scary movies, but this was scary." But then he always explained it right after, so it made me feel better. And then it's like, it wasn't too scary, so I didn't. It's not like I wanted to turn it off, but I was like, "Oh, that's like a little spooky."
But I feel like this is appeal of the detective genre, right? Is the detective character who's able to explain it, and that goes right back to like Edgar Allan Poe and stuff, right? With the the idea of the detective and the gothic merging. So you have these creepy events. Murder is creepy. And yet people who wouldn't normally like the horror genre as it became established in the early 20th century, I think you still enjoy this film.
Yeah, but like, so just like back to the horror thing, I know what you mean with the fact that Gothic fiction is not necessarily horror fiction, is not necessarily mystery fiction, but they share so many structural cues with each other.
They do.
And if you boil down essentially what they are as a story, they're all the same. It's just we place them into different genres because of what has occurred in the 100+ years.
Exactly.
So you take
horror evolves out of Gothic.
Yeah, but you take this movie's drawing on a fiction level, not just Agatha Christie, but also Edgar Allan Poe, which is referenced in the movie with the boy reading Edgar Allan Poe, and it gives him the idea, as we learn later, to blackmail the mother. But then also filmmakers who were like obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe. So not just universal horror stuff of the 30s and 40s, or Gothic dramas like the 44 Jane Eyre, or The Uninvited, things like that, right? Where they don't maybe necessarily cross over into out and out horror, but they still like exist in that cinematic world.
Yeah.
But then also stuff like Roger Corman and Mario Bava, where it's the idea that the setting informs so much of the actual mystery itself.
Yes.
Where it's like, how many shots of just stuff that's like in rooms is very important, not just on a atmospheric level, but also on a mystery level, because those elements of the scenario might be revealing a crucial aspect of the mystery. Exactly. They're clues. Yeah. So in an old Roger Corman movie, those are a little bit cornier and stuff. They're still well made, especially the Poe ones. And scenes where it's like, oh, this statue is actually a secret passageway. Like you touch something and it opens up. Or a Bava film, it's the idea that like seemingly nondescript aspect in the corner of the room is actually like hiding a dead body or like a skeleton or something. You know, there's some like macabre thing that's just hiding in plain sight.
And Poe's, I mean, you mentioned this, Anders, but right, Poe's the perfect predecessor for this, because Poe not only does the Gothic and, you know, horror, but then he is the inventor of the detective fiction as we understand it today with Dupin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ratiocinating like detective who has to think through logically to figure out things, right? So Poirot is obviously in that tradition,
right? Without Poe, you probably don't have even Conan Doyle.
You don't have Sherlock Holmes, and then you don't,
and then no Agatha Christie, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, again, this is almost a side argument. I don't know how we want to categorize as like what's the overall genre in terms of like horror and stuff, because, you know, I just think like when we often talk about horror, the emotion of like horror is not really what this movie's trying to elicit.
For sure.
But it is trying to make you scared and afraid at times. But, you know, the ghost story like this, the Gothic, like the mystery, the fear, part of the pleasure of the fear is then in the discovery. Whereas a lot of horror, there is no discovery, or if you discover something, it's worse. You discover pure terror, right? Like, right, in the most extreme form, right? A Lovecraftian, like, total horror of the universe. But it's interesting that the movie does actually tap in at times to some of those philosophical concerns. And I don't know, like, I've read some Agatha Christie. I haven't read Halloween Party.
Neither have I.
So I can't, you know, describe what's faithful and what's not in terms of this adaptation.
Well,
and it's good you point out
from
the change
England
location.
to it's not actually set in Venice, right? Halloween Party is set in England, but it still has the plot of the opera singer and inviting them all for the
in the spiritualism event, doing a séance, things like that.
As far as I from the quick summary online.
Yeah, but like so. One thing Branagh has done in all three, and again, because I'm not a Poirot expert, so I can't speak to like this is adaptation, but I've read some of her works. But Branagh brings in kind of like in all three, he brings in elements of kind of like psychological trauma to the Poirot character in little bits and pieces of sort of like flashback scenes to try to explain a little bit of like who this mysterious guy who's obsessed with, right? Like, you know, the perfect symmetry of an egg and things like this. But it tries to give like a reasoning of like, why would someone kind of like psychologically be fixated on that? And this movie did a good job, I thought, in this brief, you know, and I'm not going to overstate its significance, but did a good job of kind of like him having to tackle his, you know, what you described as sort of his like loss of faith, where he's, and what he means by that, and there's a whole line in the movie where he talks about he's essentially like after 2 world wars and seeing all the terrible things people have done on a personal level through the murder cases, he's like, I just don't believe that there is like an ordered meaning to the universe. There's not a God, and like I can't believe that things are meant to make sense. But that's interesting because ultimately the mystery genre is always about bringing order to the chaos of the events, and the pleasure of it, unlike the horror genre, the ultimate pleasure of detective fiction is in that ordering of the chaos and like kind of like the revealing of things, the discovery of things, and then sort of ordering them out at the end. And so when people say like, oh, like, you know, this movie will have like that ending where like Poirot's just going to tell everyone what happened. And you're like, yeah, that's the best part of like these kinds of movies, these kinds of stories, that the best part is when he tells you how it all happened. Like that's what it's trying to do. That's the game. That's the last part of the game.
I must tell you, madame, I have been all my life uncharmed by your kind.
My kind?
Opportunists who prey on the vulnerable, no?
You don't believe in the soul's endurance after death?
I have lost my faith.
How sad for you.
Yes, it is most sad. The truth is sad.
Please understand, madame, I would welcome with open arms any honest sign of devil or demon or ghost. For if there is a ghost, there is a soul. If there is a soul, there is a God who made it. And if we have God, we have everything, meaning, order, justice. But I have seen too much of the world. Countless crimes, 2 wars, the bitter evil of human indifference. And I conclude, no, No God, no ghosts. With respect, no mediums who can speak to them.
You were saying?
So one of the things I like, and I want to get your take on this, Aaron, and Anton too, but
You don't want to hear what I have to say?
No, we
getting
don't.
back to the cinematography and the change here. This movie, if you told me that this is directed by the same guy who made Henry V and his other adaptations, I'd be like, yeah, of course, in a way that I wasn't quite from what I saw of like Murder on the Orient Express, right, or some of his other recent films. Not all, but so this is, I think, very much more now returning to being a Branagh film in a lot of ways, including not only the filmmaking style, but also his use of some of the actors and others, right? We get a couple of the actors returning from Belfast, Jamie Dornan and Jude Hill, right, as the father and son again. So I like that he's drawing on his repertoire of actors again here and things like that. So what did you think of this as a Branagh film? And also then maybe we can use that as a jumping off to talk about some of the performances and some of the performances, the actors who you might not expect as well in a film like this.
That's perfect, because I was wanting to talk about, it is a Branagh film, and Branagh is, despite you don't want to always use the crutch of like, well, he's a Shakespearean actor first and foremost, right? But he is. And that does inform all of his decisions. And it explains why he's interested in a genre like this, in stuff like Agatha Christie works, which he respects on its own genre level. I feel like he wouldn't ever actually say that she's a Shakespeare or anything, but her importance to readers worldwide is enormous. And she does define that genre in a way that she actually, similar to Shakespeare, invents as the same, and then refines the formula of what we expect.
And Christie might be, I could be wrong, I don't know if J.K. Rowling is actually, but Christie is up there as one of the best-selling authors worldwide.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And so if it's not her, it's J.K. Rowling, but one, she sold billions.
Yeah, no, it's true. But so
she's also quintessentially an English writer, right?
yeah,
it's true. But so Branagh is Branagh he approaches genre, and we saw this in Thor, right? His Marvel movie.
Yeah.
He takes an earnest approach to it. He takes it seriously. He doesn't condescend to the material, and he's not interested in actually giving the audience any out, because this is what leads us into something else, is that the determining factor of whenever you're putting on a play, right, is tone. You have to set the tone, you have to hold the tone, and everybody has to be consistent within that tone. And then the other most important aspects of it are the pacing, because it's people in front of you on a stage. So you have to build and swell, and all the tension, all the suspense is built out of how fast you say the line and how slow you say the line, right? It's also the cadence of his delivery, why Branagh is probably one of the best enunciators of any actor ever. And despite what you think about him as a Shakespearean performer, some people I know are less charitable towards him. He is probably the best speaker of Shakespearean dialogue, in just a pure rhythm sense, of any actor ever. He is incredibly articulate and enunciates everything so well. There's a whole sequence in All Is True, his Shakespeare adaptation, Shakespeare kind of fictional biopic, where he plays Shakespeare. Yeah. And there's a scene where he recites some of Shakespeare's sonnets, and the way he does it is just even if you thought that movie was bunk, that scene, you would have to admit that wow, that's one of the best recitations I've ever heard of a Shakespeare sonnet. It's just, he hits everything so perfectly with the rhythm.
As you will ever be when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least, yet in these thoughts myself almost despising. Haply, I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate, for thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
But then you can even take that into the setting, right? Like, he's chosen a literal set as the film, and this is in the three of them because, you know, Christie's often adapted into plays.
Well, actually, I was just going to say that famously The Mousetrap, right?
Yeah.
Which earlier,
Hamlet.
one of the earliest also movies that I saw this year was the did either of you see How They Run, the film, the mystery, another murder mystery film I could have mentioned as the sort of revival, starring Saoirse Ronan and Sam Rockwell, and it also includes Agatha Christie as a character, and it's set around
was like the
performance of The Mousetrap.
That was like the longest running play.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
in
In
the West
London
End.
history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but so it's this idea that, like, while a lot of other filmmakers, right, they don't believe in these kind of theatrical shortcuts, but Branagh understands the value of a theatrical shortcut because it puts the audience into the mindset, right? So the fact that the Venice mansion and the weather is a pathetic fallacy, right? Something bad is going to happen, so it has to storm, it has to rage, there has to be literal ghosts knocking on the doors, and the idea of the wind. And some people would be like, that's corny, and Branagh, the way Branagh sets it up is like, no, it actually is essential because it's an emotional mindset. He puts you into that now you are susceptible to you are essentially sinking into the tone, to the pacing. You're being absorbed into not only the mystery, but then the world that it's creating through this theatrical ensemble of actors, right? Because that's the other thing, is that what's really essential in a Branagh film, and I think sometimes makes or breaks it, is the casting decisions.
For sure. Okay, before we get into casting in the actors, building on what you were saying, I love that point about Branagh's approach to the material, informed by his Shakespearean experience. Because you're totally right, and it's such a strange connection, but like his approach to Agatha Christie, his approach to Thor, you know, Marvel Comics, it's not condescending to the material. It's taking it like on straightforward as something that like needs to be dealt with seriously within its own, you know, terms and in tone and all that, which is very interesting in comparison to, say, think of how Joss Whedon approaches Thor, the character of Thor in the Avengers, versus how Branagh approaches Thor. We get the fish out of water jokes in Branagh's original Thor, but we don't get this overall sense that we have to kind of smirk at this character. We can never take it seriously. And then if we go with the whodunit, we take Rian Johnson's approach to the whodunit, which again condescends to the material and assumes that a whodunit, it's on its face, is kind of a bit of a farce, and like we can't take it seriously. Whereas Branagh's approach to the whole genre is like, no, this is like, you know, just like a Shakespearean play has its 5 acts, and Agatha Christie has to work out the way it does, and we have to treat with respect that final reveal when he goes through all the different things. And it's like your point just like clarifies that I think there is something, whether it's the Shakespearean or what, but that approach to the genre, and for me, that's very satisfying when someone approaches the genre without that kind of smirk and condescension. Even if I liked aspects of Rian Johnson's whodunits, but that is the difference between, say, what Branagh's doing with these Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, and what we're getting with, you know, the Daniel Craig, Rian Johnson films.
Yeah, and it actually goes one step further, and this will lead us back into the performers, but it's that by virtue of taking the genre seriously, like, he also takes the characters seriously, and he takes them as people seriously, and that's actually essential to Poirot in this film, right? Like, this film and the others. His whole coming to a realization about what the actual solution to the mystery is predicated on him understanding these people, not the fronts they're putting up, not the caricature they might resemble, but the actual person, their past, their real wants, their real desires, their real fears, and the real hatreds, right? Like, he essentially has to understand them as fully dimensional human beings in order to solve the mystery, which is why, you know, his investigation is also interviews. Yes. The interviews reveal the character, but also reveal their secrets and their sympathies. So, but at the same time, it makes you suspicious of the characters. It makes you sympathetic to the characters, right? You start to care about these people because they've lost things, and you learn why.
So, for instance, You get the brother and sister, Desdemona and Alessandro, right? Who
Romani's from Hungary.
Yeah, who are obviously, displaced from World War II and all this, but they, in another film they could be just kind of supporting villain characters, right? But here they're given a little more rich characterization.
I need to know. All right, I should have researched this before, but you're like, I am curious whether we get that a scene where those characters talk about the meaning of watching the first half of Meet Me in St. Louis, and the film gives a lot of like touching attention to that. Sorry, what?
Which involves
it's got the Halloween party. When the old kids burn in the streets.
You're
right. They're just burning stuff.
I honestly can't say. I don't know if it's in the Christie or not, but regardless, Branagh makes that into a moment of meaning. Like it's not tossed off as sort of just like a thing.
But even think about the resolution of the mystery. It's when we find out that it's the mom has poisoned her daughter, killed her, and then killed others to cover it up. It's like that's the worst possible result because it's the darkest.
Yeah.
But it's also like you can just tell it makes him sad to reveal it.
Yeah. So the detective has to not like you made an interesting point about like the detective can't just take the performances of the people around them.
No.
So in that sense, they have to function as both like director and right. Poirot's the director always, in the sense of not only does he sort of lock the doors and control the setting of like where people can go, which is sort of like the standard procedure. No one can leave this place until we solve things. But then you also get the one-on-one talks, and so he has to understand them also as actors, right? And characters, and not just as the performance.
Yeah. Well, Anton, if we're taking a theatrical understanding, wouldn't be the director; he'd be the stage manager character, which is a classic Shakespearean figure, right? Who investigates the very mode of the play. In the play, while also interrogating the reality of the other characters.
We're back to like Measure for Measure, where is it the Duke or the Prince who goes around
in Measure for Measure?
And in disguise measures up each person. Yeah,
I mean it's in lots of his stuff, but so like on a performance level, like I think a lot of the key scenes in this movie rely on the performers that he's cast. Like Jamie Dornan, the scene where he talks about Bergen-Belsen, like the concentration camps, and like he, attempts to kill himself afterwards. He's so disgusted with what he saw. You have Kelly Riley from Yellowstone, like talking as the mother, discussing the loss of her daughter, but then also like the idea of, she could never sing again after losing her because she was an opera singer. Like, what did you guys like the performances? Because across the board, I thought they were quite good. But my favorite of all the additions is probably just Tina Fey, who actually works really well as like a 1940s person.
I wasn't sure how I was gonna like it. I remember the casting. I was like, "What, Tina Fey in this movie?"
She's a bit of a Liz Lemon character, but it's funny.
This kind of like she's the novelist character.
But her and Branagh have a really good.
They did have a good rapport, and you could buy them as like friends.
And they both can toss off the lines like really. There's like some moments of like banter between them that are really clever and well delivered, and they could become kind of like that. Could just kind of get like mushed over,
But think about it, like what is Tina Fey most known for in the comic universe, right? Like she pioneered the idea of fast dialogue onto TV again. Like 30 Rock is all about the jokes are falling over each other where you can't even hear them all because there's just so many coming at you, which is, again, it's a cadence and tone thing. Like I like the fact that Branagh, he looks for people who's like, I think you'll fit in this and I can like shape you into more like a classical setting because you have the skills necessary for it, even if you're like, you do something very modern. So I like Tina Fey quite a bit, but I thought like Jamie Dornan was good in his limited role. And Kelly Riley's just one of those characters. I feel like she's an actor who can like only portray tortured people.
Totally.
I think the first movie I ever saw her in was like Flight. She was like,
Flight, True Detective season 2.
Yeah.
She's just always so sad looking.
What did you think of Michelle Yeoh as? I mean, she. Not to give too much, she doesn't have as big a role, but it's definitely a kind of.
We've already spoiled Andy, man.
So she's obviously not an authentic. or is she? But the
I mean, that's the unsettled part.
Exactly.
But
no, I think that Michelle Yeoh, she kind of gets because she's coming off like an Oscar win, and her like
for sure
she gets the big acting role in the movie, right?
Yeah, who's the biggest name?
Performance, and
you killed the biggest name.
Yeah, and the character has to put on
all
that
his
performance,
films now,
right? Where she's just over the top and she's like spinning around and like.
No, but think about like 2017's Murder on the Orient Express. Johnny Depp is the guy who's killed. He's the biggest star in the movie, even if he was on his downward trajectory, right?
Yeah.
2022's Death on the Nile. It's Gal Gadot gets killed. She's the biggest star in the movie. Like, it's a thing now. So I feel like if he's going to do another one, he's going to have to misdirect it because...
Yeah. Cast 2 big stars and you never know.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think that in terms of the casting, like, so Tina Fey and Michelle Yeoh, well cast, partly also because they feel like those characters who, you know, we've never met before, and you're matched up against both those characters in different scenes are kind of like matched up against Poirot, who now we've seen like 3 movies with Branagh in that role, but then also just like a famous character. And I feel like the casting also helps to kind of like make us believe that those characters are holding their own against Poirot. So in terms of the banter and, you know, like she understands how the mysteries work. You know, Tina Fey's writer character understands how the mysteries work. And then there's an interesting exchange between Michelle Yeoh's spiritualist, like medium, and Poirot about like, you know, do you believe these things? And she has, Yeoh has like really interesting, within that scene, she plays it a couple different ways between the like, why don't you just have some fun, sort of like poking him. And then also like this earnest, like all this stuff is real and it tortures me. And it's interesting because after that, you're like, I don't actually know how I should read her. Like, is she just a total con, or is she, you know, this nurse who is like tortured by the sounds of ghosts? Like, and she plays it in a way that is, you know, it was a compelling scene, but it also like it totally leaves you unclear on where she stands and what's real there, which the film then sort of leads into as one of its themes, I think.
You know, I was pleasantly surprised that also just in a couple, I enjoyed a couple of the smaller performances from actors who I wasn't as familiar with, like Ricardo Scamasio as his bodyguard / the former police officer.
What else?
John Wick. John Wick 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually, Kyle Allen as the ex-fiance. He's kind of appropriately, like, I wasn't sure how to take him at first. Like, is he just this slimy, you know, cat?
You always get a character like that. They show up, they're so like kind of smarmy and annoying at the start, but then there's more to it.
So, you know, I like it. And then of course the biggest thing is casting. I thought Jude Hill from Belfast as the son, you know, the version of himself from Belfast.
So what did you think of the boy? So my sense on you,
I'm
Anders,
always iffy on precocious child characters,
yeah.
right? I find them sometimes it's a tricky thing to do. I thought he comported himself well. At the beginning, I wasn't sure how to feel about him, but then, you know, revealing his knowingness and the blackmail and all that, and
that makes the precocious interesting better. Because
exactly.
Then it becomes actually a character flaw, right? Like,
right.
The boy thought he could like do something, you know, and work it his way, but it actually shows how still innocent and ununderstanding he is of things, right? How
exactly, because otherwise, I think many other writers and directors and performers would have done something with that in the current climate, where it'd be like, oh, this kid's no, I don't like that. But I think that it resolves well.
No, exactly. That's the way that they set up that character. You know, there's something suspect because the precocious child is such a type. Yeah. And because the film continues to lean into that type, you're like aware that there's another shoe to drop there on a mystery sense.
And the fact that the orphanage is haunted by children, he's the only child character.
But so, yeah, the characters, like, I could tell the audience that I was seeing it with, and it was a pretty full house. And again, you know, pretty young folks, because I feel like young folks always go for like kind of a spooky movie, especially this time of year. And they would kind of laugh when he would show up on screen and say something really like ominous or really adult. Like, and it was a mix of like oh, that's like a silly line. And then it's also like, oh, that's kind of creepy. Like, does he know something that they don't? So it's, you know, it's a bit of an unsettling aspect. And it's like another classic Gothic thing. Think about the most famous Gothic story of all time, Turn of the Screw. It's all about 2 weird kids.
Yeah.
like who seem to know more. And I see him out the window, the coachman. Don't you know he's there and stuff?
Yeah, the
and you don't
imaginary
really know
friend.
whether he's having one over on you. And this movie resolves aspects of that, right? It proves that because he's blackmailing the mother, you can understand the kind of game he's playing and how he's trying to present himself to Poirot and the others. But it doesn't actually resolve, like, does he hear the voices or not?
Yeah.
And things like that. And so this movie is in that interesting space where I don't really, you don't want to like psychoanalyze Branagh or read too much into it or anything, but there is some actual interesting like spiritual aspect to it where the film seems to come down, or the film seems to shift closer in the direction of the mystery is resolved, but there's like, or the murder is resolved, the murder is solved, but the mystery of like the reality of these spirits, the movie like takes a firm step in the direction of more likely than less from where it started, but with regards to like all elements.
I would agree that's more than where it started, in the sense of partly because the Poirot character as the rational skeptic goes into it being like, I'm going to totally disprove this medium. And then initially we get, a total disproving of what we thought was like this compelling seance, but then it keeps to reinforce, but it holds one foot on the possibility of the poisoning messing up his mind.
Yeah.
So that allows a rational explanation for all of the strange things we see, but it keeps the door open the entire time for the fact that potentially there could be more. And that then kind of resolves Poirot's like philosophical conundrum that he has, where it kind of opens the door and says that you could believe in more than just meets the eye, but it has to be a matter of faith. It can't be proven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like the thematic resolution. But I think it's interesting within this film to settle on that and to not just firmly like close the door and be like, oh, like, that all the spiritualist stuff was not real. It was just all a con.
The poisoning.
And then even the fact that we go down into the basement and we do discover, like this creepy ghost story about children during plague being like abused and tortured in this nursery, or sorry, not nursery, like this hospital for kids, right? Or
hospital.
Doctors and nurses are the targets.
True.
And,
yeah.
It was a plague ward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we get this really creepy moment where like that's revealed, and you see like the dead
skeletons,
boy's skeleton and stuff, and you're like, so it goes out of its way to like show that there's more to the stories than meets the eye. So it's not it's interesting that the film, it's not fully embracing like a Poirot like rationalization of everything.
Yeah, but it's also, it ties the kind of spiritualism, or at least like a possibility of faith, also into Poirot's re-engagement with the world and the faith in humanity again in some small way, right?
Yes.
Because you have the whole speech about he's doesn't want to believe in that anymore, but it faith. You cannot resolve the question of whether that place is haunted off evidence alone. You have to do it out of a measure of faith. And the movie kind of takes the same approach, or at least shows the Poirot character taking the same approach towards humanity in general, where it's like the evidence is to the contrary, but for it to work, it's actually more like helpful and hopeful to like take a step of faith in terms of people are worth helping and like worth engaging with. And that's why, he has the line of people outside his door wanting him to solve their mysteries, and right at the end he kind of takes that up again and hilariously seems to solve the guy's entire conundrum based off one letter.
But then he also kind of solves like he doesn't punish all the people who've done things wrong.
No.
And he also like kind of, he doesn't force them to, but he allows them to try to sort of like make their own amends. And there's a few different scenarios where it's like, so if you've been blackmailing, maybe you could use this money for something better. And then, he doesn't force the kid to go give the money to anyone or turn himself in or something like that. But that you're right, but that encouragement of other people to act is the kind of like the step of faith towards believing that humanity is worthwhile. Because there is an interesting thing about like, if I can't find like, it's like, if I can't find a perfect egg, like what's the point of this whole universe? Like, but he's moved beyond that. But he definitely, the character was like locked in this like, I guess, view of how things are. Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like we all enjoyed the film and found it satisfying. And it's a good genre piece, but also has a little bit more to it just to pique the interest in that way. So definitely, I'm glad we ended up talking about this for this episode. So, do you think I don't know. I haven't read enough Christie novels. Any of you have any ideas of which ones they might do next, or heard anything about any rumblings?
I don't actually know, because these movies had first Murder on the Orient Express was like a pretty big hit.
Yeah.
But then the subsequent ones, because Death on the Nile was pushed during COVID and then kind of just unceremoniously dumped, because obviously it was produced by Fox. Disney bought Fox. Disney doesn't really care about it anymore. And then it kind of, flopped. This one has made a bit more money, but it was also a much tighter budget because it was produced, it was the production started under Disney's shepherding. And so like they kind of set the terms now as like the fact that it's under 20th Century Studios or whatever, like, their new version of Fox. So I feel like they understood, okay, we're going to be a little more deliberate. We'll put in that like soft pre-Halloween, but not in the actual like horror section of the release schedule.
Yeah.
And it's not making a ton of money, but it'll definitely make its budget back, right? Like,
yeah, I'm curious if he's going to do more of these.
But I could also think about I'm curious about like revenue streams for these kind of films, because I feel like these films have a huge amount of, whether it's cable, which is still a thing.
If this was on, and when this shows up on streaming,
on Disney Plus,
this seems very
like it will be at Netflix top 10 for like a month if it's when it shows up, kind of thing. And so I wonder if there's like money there, because I feel like these are the kind of movies that are much more rewatchable than like many films that come out now. Not necessarily because they're like better than other films. It's just they fit. There's a reason why people return to these mysteries and return to specifically Agatha Christie, right? Like,
and demographically, then you get a bunch of people, a lot of time older people who will, if they are connected with streaming, like people like our parents, this is the exact kind of movie they'll want to watch on streaming, but they might not venture out to the movie theater to see.
Yeah, so I don't know which one he'll do next, if he can do. I hope he does another, and I kind of hope he keeps using it as a way to engage with like different genre elements and in his own weird way telling his strange story of like the early mid 20th century through these movies.
The real question will be whether he could anyone pull off The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, a movie version. I'm not, if you don't know what the twist is, I'm not going to tell you, but I just don't know if someone could actually put it on film.
The attempt on my life occurred at approximately 2 minutes after the chime of midnight. You were the first to find the body at...
Don't you dare look at me like a murder suspect. We're old friends.
Every murderer is somebody's old friend. But you have written too many clever murders to fall at the foot of your first victim, and you are, so far, viably alibied by the chef for the time, which is why I shall now ask you to assist me in my investigation.
When do we start?
When you collect for me our host.
I knew you were in there somewhere. All it took was a corpse, and look at you. Hercule Poirot all over again.
So at the end of the summer, all three of us reviewed the Pirates of the Caribbean movies for the purposes of our retrospective. There are only 3. Each of us tackled one of them. And I thought, maybe we've got the reviews up on the site. I thought we did a pretty good job of tackling what makes those films like interesting. As I said in my review of At World's End, the last one, it's kind of become something of a recurring motif in our reviews of going back to these films that at the time were criticized and finding that some, not all, but some of the criticism at the time may have been hasty, or that time has judged them kindly in some way. That their excesses or perceived flaws at the time are kind of look like virtues now. So I don't know. Maybe that was mostly for At World's End, because I think the first 2 Pirates films in the trilogy were quite well received. But did you both rewatch all of them, or because I did? I rewatched all 3 of the films in order before preparing to write At World's End.
I did not get to rewatch At World's End. I will say I think you and Aaron are both way too generous towards both the Matrix sequels, which I know that's partly what you're talking about, and At World's End. I need to rewatch At World's End, so I can't judge it. When I saw it in theaters,
the movies
it did
definitely
not
have an
like
hour
it.
too long, and I understand why people think it kind of devolves into a mess. But I kind of love the mix of the maelstrom and the whirlpool and like the whirling ideas going
But
on screen.
I feel like
But also,
this
I love
in
the
Matrix.
like surrealism and like playfulness of the first, strange weirdness of the like middle part of that film. Like the whole idea of Davy Jones' locker is just like so crazy and like. The way that I love the moment when they go over the edge of the world and it fades to black and you actually get the recording of the dead men tell no tales from the actual Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and it actually cuts to black for like a few seconds before you awaken with Jack Sparrow in Davy Jones' locker, and that I'm like, that's a great bit of filmmaking.
I don't know. I just feel like you're in danger with your criticism of like becoming this defender of like the maligned third film.
Just wait till I get to the 20th anniversary of Peter Jackson's King Kong, guys. Only 2 more years to go.
Well, that wasn't maligned. That movie won a bunch of Oscars.
Oh, I know.
But
people,
no, it's
people
true.
don't treat it very kindly today.
And Anton, it's funny that you bring up revolutions and stuff, because I actually think like the closest analogs are the Matrix sequels in terms of the wild ambitions and not necessarily paying it off. But both the third movies, in my mind, I hold them similarly, where I'm like, this is a very interesting movie. There's aspects of it that I kind of love that the movie goes in the opposite direction that you think. So like in Matrix Revolutions, the film's kind of staunch opposition to having a finality in it, right? Like it rejects the idea of a like linear narrative, essentially.
I think a lot. We're not talking about the Matrix here, but I think a lot of people forget that it's not Matrix Revolution, but the Matrix Revolution.
Yeah, but it also fits with like the shift away from like savior, the idea of like actually it's going into almost Buddhist realm, where it's like you don't need savior, you transcend the concept of it, kind of thing.
And likewise at World's End, I think that title suggests that they're pushing it to the limit, right? Like you first you go to Singapore and then you go literally over the edge of the world.
Off the edge of the map. No, it's true. But like at World's End, it does not resolve the Will and Elizabeth romance in the way that a typical Hollywood trilogy would. It's actually a really tragic, sad ending. Even if Will doesn't like die, he's brought back, but he's
only
like
gets
cursed,
to see his family
right?
every 10 years. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I admire it, but I do think like At World's End is the worst of the three. I don't think it's as good as the first one, and
on the level of story and entertainment, I actually do think that it might outdoes the first one in visuals. I think that the sets and the CGI and everything is better than the like Ghost Pirates and stuff of the first one. And Singapore and some of the other sets are just like unreal. Like they just don't make a movie like that today. Like they created a set of like this like fantasy pirate world, and it didn't look like a CGI backdrop in a Marvel movie. It looked as real as the Venice of Haunting in Venice that we just talked about.
No, it's true. It's true. No, absolutely. And I actually think so. To answer your like initial prompt, I rewatched all three, and I rewatched Dead Man's Chest twice because I was writing on it, and I wanted to like confirm some of the timing aspects because the movie has a really, really strict structure with how it teases out things. And I think at World's End, there's aspects of it that I think are like goofy as hell. Basically, the whole Calypso stuff is like I don't think it works, but I enjoy the insanity of that like maelstrom ending. But it's true that At World's End is like an enormous budget movie, and you can see the budget on the screen, and it's really epic in scale. It looks great. The CGI holds up so well today. Well, Curse the Black Pearl, I think, is like insanely rewatchable. Johnny Depp in it is like one of the all-time iconic performances. It's so quotable, but I still think that like once they show up at Ile de la Muerta with Elizabeth and they find out, wait, you're not Will Turner's, like you're not Elizabeth Turner, you're Elizabeth Swan, and they have to go back and then back. It's like the movie gets like soggy plotting where it's like I'm like, okay, it's a little too long. Well, Dead Man's Chest, I find like, oh no, this is a movie. This is like a Hollywood blockbuster. This is like hitting on all cylinders it's just so fun.
I think that the reason a lot of people look most fondly on Dead Man, Curse of the Black Pearl, is because it is the best Jack Sparrow film of performances. Anton, as we were saying, like you said that it's one of the like iconic performances. If it's the most like iconic original character of the 2000 aughts or whatever, right?
Yep.
He was literally nominated for Best Actor, like alongside Bill
Which I
Murray.
forgot
and
about
Sean
in my
Penn.
review. Yeah.
He won the Screen Actor.
Yeah. But whereas by the time I think you actually get to the last couple, he's kind of outstays welcome. But actually, what I like is that at World's End stuff make Elizabeth and Will a little more interesting.
So I think the first Pirates, as I stated in my review, I think it's like the kind of movie where like it's undeniably just like a classic film, in large part because of the Johnny Depp performance. But it is a classic film. But it is one of these classic films that are like imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's true. Like I've watched that movie a number of times now, and I still don't really understand what's going on. In that, like, you're like 3/4 in, you're like, what are we chasing right now, and where are we going? Whereas Dead Man's Chest, rewatching that was I did get a chance to rewatch that one, and so I will get to At World's End at some point. Dead Man's Chest is it's sprawling, it's huge, right? It's 2.5 hours. The budget, everything looks amazing, right? Like it's obviously a bigger budget than the first one, but they spend it well. And I don't know who it was originally, one of our film friends, but they said back in the day that like Dead Man's Chest was like Empire Strikes Back, where it just expands the pirates world, and you can see like the money on screen of how they've like expanded it. And that doesn't denigrate like A New Hope, Curse the Black Pearl, but you just sort of see the expansion on screen, and it's great to take in. But it's also the most tight narratively. Like it, like when I rewatched Dead Man's Chest, I was like, the parts where I'm confused, I'm supposed to be confused. Like
because the characters are constantly
the characters are switching around, and you're not like the information hasn't been entirely revealed. What is the compass? Where's that leading? Like that stuff you're not supposed to know, because it's keeping it like a mystery that is slowly parceled out and revealed. But in terms of like the actual structure, like, Aaron, in your review, you point out like you get those things where it's like it's the slow reveal of Davy Jones, the slow reveal of the building tension around the whole Kraken release. Like all this stuff is just managed superbly. And I think like it just has to be considered one of the great like swashbucklers.
Absolutely.
Like with the wheel fight, like it's just, when I was just like, it's so good. It's hands down better than most blockbusters today for just the sheer entertainment of watching like the fighting and the combination of like the real effects, the CGI, all that sort of stuff. And so I think Dead Man's Chest for me is like, Dead Man's Chest belongs in like it maybe someone thinks I'm crazy, but you're like, this belongs up there with like Adventures of Robin Hood, like this is one of the great.
No, that's absolutely what. That's absolutely
that movie's
what I was
not
thinking.
perfect.
Watching it again. No, but that's absolutely what I was thinking. Watching it again, where I was like, no, I think this is like a great movie actually, but it's like a movie, right? Like,
yeah. You're like, it's not, and it's not even trying to transcend the genre, right? This isn't The Dark Knight where it's like this is a film that's like turning the genre into like something on a very serious level. The way that also The Godfather took like mob stories and turned it into something supremely serious and significant. You're like, no, this is great the way that some of those like 30s adventures are. Even when I rewatched the Disney Treasure Island, I was like, this is really
and you
good.
did a good job of pointing out how I think the trilogy is a sort of a most underrated or unsung great actor is Jeffrey Rush's Barbossa.
Yeah,
the cues he takes. I just, after watching it, I'm like, maybe that's also why I like the third one, because you get the most Barbossa as a hero. He's just like, as Aaron, as you pointed out, right? He's
Lando.
He's the Lando.
He's the Lando
of the trilogy.
No, it actually
makes him the most fun character.
Man, it is actually insane. And so when I remember, I was thinking about this when I was like editing your review, and it's just like the overall structure of Curse of the Black Pearl is just identical to A New Hope. Like, it's kind of, like if I just started talking it out loud, and it was like, okay, you have this young orphan. He's living. His dad does doing this thing. He was out there in exploration. He gets caught up with this like rogue, and then he's gonna go find the princess that he's in love with. And then it's like they got to go to the fortress of the bad, and then wait, they rescue her. But wait, they actually have to go here, and they're coming back to get them, and they have to go out again and actually solve the it's like every kind of connection to the characters and breaking apart and going back together is just them taking Han, Leia, and Luke and going together, apart, together, apart. The difference is there's no Obi-Wan and there's no Force stuff, right? But I'm just saying on we talked about this even back in 2006 once Dead Man's Chest came out. We were always like, it's one, it's like the Matrix and the Star Wars movies. It understands the great trio. Great trilogy is also about a trio of characters that I love these three, and they split up and they get together.
You're right. I didn't mention the
other thing that was interesting was last week I rewatched for the first time in many, many years, The Mask of Zorro. Speaking of swashbucklers, movies that have great sword fighting scenes and stuff with Banderas,
the Banderas,
Anthony Hopkins and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and that film is a very classically constructed film. It has almost no CGI, which is interesting compared with Pirates of the Caribbean, where I think that's the big difference. Gore Verbinski's use of special effects and camera.
Does Mask of Zorro have? Does
it's 1998. It has very little, if any, at all.
Yeah,
it's almost all practical stunts. Like the scene when Zorro chases the guys on horseback and works his way from the back to the front, taking them off the horses is great. But then I had totally forgotten when I got to the end of the film that it's screenplay by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who wrote the Pirates trilogy. I'm like, of course, because they took that same template and then with Gore Verbinski transferred it to the pirate world. So
people should revisit these movies, honestly, especially if you're kind of feeling like they're no, but especially if you're getting worn down with CGI slop now, because something like Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, whether you are on board with all the narrative stuff or not, but it proves that you can do marvelous, fantastical things with CGI and they can look cool on screen. It
Davy
doesn't
Jones
need to be
amazing.
It does not need to be a slog of grayness and shadow, because even the scenes with Davy Jones's crew, right? Mm-hmm. They're in shadow, but everyth's clear because you have to see the details of the weird pirates. There's the shark guy. There's the the eel guy, the conch guy. That's the kind of creativity stuff, and it shows it's if you're going to spend the money, make it creative. But then something like Mask of Zorro is you want something where it's about star power, right? Too. Because you don't really get that in modern movies.
Anthony Hopkins was still young enough to be a little bit also a swashbuckler in there.
Yeah,
he's pretty cool.
They do also I feel it's really only Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible, where you're actually getting coherent yet super interesting chase scenes. I just feel going back to watching Pirates. I haven't watched Mask of Zorro in a while, but you describing it, you're it's we've lost the ability to have in so many of there's a lot of blockbusters that you're this chase action scene is just not interesting. There's not actually that that interplay with the environment and with the playful interaction with all the objects around. And that the pirate movies are really good at doing that too, where it's even just a fight in in the first film, the fight in the blacksmith
with the
shop, it shows just a creativity with the environment that is, I just feel I do not see on most of these sort of action sequences.
It demonstrates Spielbergian blocking.
Yeah.
So perhaps the sort of sum up that we can say of this episode is there's still something to be said for good old-fashioned genre filmmaking and paying attention to those little details, whether it's a pirate swashbuckler or a gothic thriller mystery.
I'm going to kill Jones.
Can't let you do that, will you? Because if Jones is dead, who's to call his terrible beastie off the hunt, eh? Now, if you please, the key.
I keep the promises I make, Jack. I intend to free my father. I hope you're here to see it.
I can't let you do that either. So sorry.
I knew you'd warm up to me eventually.
Lord Beckett desires the contents of that chest. I deliver it. I get my life back.
The dark side of ambition.
Oh, I prefer to see it as the promise of redemption.
Thanks for listening, and please leave a 5-star review, and we'll catch you next time on Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.